Welcome.
Thank you.
I got to be honest with you. When I first read this, I thought it said BreachPro. And I was a little excited about maybe some volleyball. I knew where the beer was.
Well, you know, somebody suggested it was a son of a breach.
Note to self, we need to run the jokes by the host before the show. I hate when the guest is funnier than me. That's not a good way to start. Well, welcome to Mesa Morning Live, and tell us a little bit about who are you guys and what is BreachPro? BreachPro.
There you go.
It's early for me.
It's fun
really.
in the sun. Fun in the sun.
You'll get it right before the end.
Yeah.
Well, first of all, most all of you are business owners, right? And, you know, as business owners, if you're sitting here today and your IT person called you and said your security has just been breached, all your client data was gone, what would be going through your mind? Bob?
Here we go. Watch the screen. Sorry, our data has been breached. There we go. Wow.
That's why we developed BreachPro, to keep you from being intimidated.
That's right.
That's the scenario in my head every morning when I wake up, right there. Well, that's very cool, and boy, that is. It's not like this isn't in the news like every day. How do we keep the Russians from getting all of our information?
That's that's the challenge when you're in business, trying to protect this information, and really the government's also come into play on that and said there's regulations, and it's the first time in the history of America where we're being really penalized for the fraudulent activities of others. So as a business owner, you can actually end up with regulatory penalties and fines if you don't protect this information, and you end up paying for, again, the fraudulent activities of the Russians and on these others. So protecting that is really critical, and the first step is getting the compliance in place. Second is getting your IT security in place, and the third is making sure that you insure it at the end of the day when and if a breach occurs. So those are some of the things that you need to look at as a business owner when looking at this risk in your business.
What's your background? How did BreachPro begin?
Well, BreachPro actually came about in kind of a funny way. We work with the National Association with attorneys. It's called the ALA, 9,000 law offices. They asked us to put together, for law offices specifically, a program where we could help them eliminate the types of breach that was going on, because they're one of the number one areas that is picked on the worst. In doing this, we came to a realization that it was not just a program. There are three distinct components to the program. The first part, which is the compliance, which everybody is required by law, excuse me, by law to do, is completely overlooked and mainly unknown to most business people. The second part, which is the protection, is your IT. And then the third part, as Mark said, is to make sure you've got adequate insurance, because the breach will happen sooner or later. Just like with Target, what happened to Target? They had a huge breach, and they got over $1 billion in fines for lack of compliance with the rules and regulations.
Wow.
It's been real tough. It's been tough for Target in general. You know, they had almost a 50% drop in their stock at the announcement of the breach. And we always look at it and we say, okay, well, that's a big retailer. How can that happen to me as a small to medium-sized business? And in the area of risk that we see with business in general, and even in our small to medium-sized businesses, about 70% of the problem is in that category with small to medium-sized businesses, even though we see the targets out there being affected by it. And the cost is just immense. You know, they walked the CEO out the front door 6 weeks after the breach occurred. A CIO was fired, that's the Chief Information Officer, 2 weeks after, and they're still looking at lackluster profits for 2014. So it's been a real rough ride for Target. 110 million people affected by the breach and still trying to recover from it. And so it's a challenge to business, and it's a challenge, what we want to make sure that you understand, it's a challenge to all businesses no matter what size your organization is. If you have a significant breach, these are the statistics from the Poneman Institute, 40% of your clients will consider doing business with somebody else. 30% of your clients will stop doing business with you, and 5% of your clients will consider suing. So when you look at those numbers, and I always look at business, you know, the old 80-20 rule, 20% of your customers pay for 80% of your bills. If 20% of those customers fall into that 30% segment, it's business over. And unfortunately, we've had clients that we work with that have come to us after the fact more on a reactive measure. Hey, we've got a problem, help us with these forensics, help us figure out what happened. We had a group in San Diego recently that we worked with, and they said this is the biggest nightmare we've ever considered. We never even knew that this could happen to us. We'd never wish it on any business. But when something like that happens, it's how do we recover from it quickly? And so with businesses, we really encourage businesses to take a look at this risk. It's the quiet storm that we see that is causing issues with businesses in America. And we're seeing smaller organizations going out of business, either from the regulatory penalties and fines or, again, the indirect costs with clients leaving.
You know, Target was a huge story, but recently a Valley-based company, P.F. Chang's, did you see that? Where they got zapped and there was a data breach there and a lot of credit card customers. And I think you had a story about that, Gary.
I had kind of an interesting personal experience with it. The CFO of one of the largest, the CEO of one of the largest cardiac surgical facilities had asked me to go to lunch to discuss BreachPro. He asked to go to P.F. Chang's. I got to P.F. Chang's about 10 minutes before he did, and I was sitting there going through my phone. You know, we all fiddle with that a little bit. And I punched on channel 15. Came up, P.F. Chang has reported a breach. So when Ken came in, I said, Ken, who's going to pay for this? He said, you have any money? He said, not much. He says, I got my credit cards. I said, do you want to pay with a credit card? And I showed him the picture, and he said,
Wow, that's. I know I was there that day, and I opened up a fortune cookie, and it said, pay with cash. That should have been a clue, really, right there. Well, so, all right, you guys are the pros. You know the ins and outs of this. And by the way, if you've got any questions for these guys, feel free to, through your Crowd Mics app, text them to me, and I'll make sure they get answered. But what should these folks do to protect themselves in the best possible way? What are the three top things besides calling BreachPro?
Besides calling BreachPro, three top things. Again, back to that management of the risk within your organization. Look at the compliance, make sure you're in compliance, looking at particularly the area of how your employees process that personal identifiable information. That's what we're talking about. The information of your clients that's personal identifiable information. And making sure that's processed properly, because 96% of the problem comes from the mistakes that are made by employees and staff. 4% of it's brute force. We see the hackers getting through your firewall and stealing that information. But they have methods that they use, and so you want to make sure you protect against that. So that first step is really getting your staff up to speed, understanding the risk, understanding the do's and don'ts within the system, when to open up an email, not to open up an email, whether to use a thumb drive or not, and all these other issues that come into play when we have breaches. So that's the first area. The second, again, like Gary was talking about, the protect side, making sure you have layers of protection within your system. If you've got a third-party vendor handling, and a lot of times the small to mid-sized businesses have a third-party vendor that handles your break fix, take a look at that contract that you have with that vendor, make sure that you've got security in place that can protect your system, and that you've got that monitored on a regular basis, and that you've got the security patches for the software being updated on a regular basis. And then the last area, of course, is the preserving your business, is really sitting down and looking at the insurance and making sure you get proper coverages to cover for it. So those are the three areas that we look at.
We've got a question here from Dave. He says, is there any way to be 100% protected?
Don't be in business.
I'm halfway there.
Yeah. There's not 100%.
Yeah, no, there's
not.
there's an inherent risk, I'm sure.
It's very, you know, the thing that we see, it's very sophisticated. We've got crime rings that are doing this. We've got the Russians, we've got the Chinese. You've seen it all in the news. And they're attacking businesses. The Chinese have been attacking us since the early 80s. They've got sophisticated organizations within their government that are attacking U.S. businesses. Why? There's big money in it. You know, we're losing about $67 billion a year in revenue right out of our economy due to breach. And so when we look at that problem and we compare it to other problems we have in the U.S., look at illegal drugs don't even match up. $67 billion. So it's a quiet storm, and it can happen to anybody. I was in a seminar just the other day, and I had a guy stand up and say, hey, Mark, this is true. This happens to small, mid-sized businesses. My brother just had a breach, and with the regulatory penalties and fines, he's out of business. So $300,000. When you look at the numbers of a breach, just kind of give you the dollar amounts. If you have a breach within your organization, a significant breach, it's going to cost anywhere from about $188 to $214 per record. So think about that. If you had 1,000 client records that were breached and you had to spend $188, you're $188,000, you know, in the red already. So those are the kind of things we're looking at. And there are state laws, 46 state laws that regulate this, and federal regs that are also dictating the protection of clients' information.
One other question here real quick. What antivirus do you recommend?
There's quite a few different good ones out there. Symantec has probably some of the best. We also have partners. FireEye has got some phenomenal products. They're number one in the security industry, so that's something to take a look at when you're looking at your virus protection for your system.
Okay. Well, I know you guys could, questions, everybody's got a question, and you guys could talk about this all day. Unfortunately, we don't have that kind of time. Are you going to hang around?
We will. We'll be back here at our booth. Happy to answer any questions.
At the end of the Mesa Morning Live, feel free to stop by and talk to them and see if they got any questions. I thank you guys for coming out.
Thank you.
Appreciate it, and thanks for the video. That was fun.
Yeah, there you
How about a big round of applause for Gary and Mark? Thanks, guys.